Welcome to the first edition of the Get Lit podcast, a podcast brought to you by Southern Lighting Solutions. I'm here with Tarek, my business partner. I am McHugh David. We appreciate you guys joining us here in the updated podcast room. There's a lot of bright lights. We got to get used to that. So, good morning, afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. We have. I can tell that you're bored. We have played with the video and audio settings in here for a while now. We think we found a good medium, at least for our first one.
There's no we in this.
Yeah, okay, fine. Throw me under the bus. As you can see, we are off to a great start in our business partnership. But today, we're going to ease into this. We're going to talk a little bit about mostly who Tarek is and some of the things he's done in the LED world leading up to us starting this business. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the first few things that we'll be getting into with further podcasts. We also want to ask you guys, go to our YouTube channel, go to our Facebook page. We do have another series called The Workbench, which is where we're out there. Yeah.
Where I cut myself, slice myself, electrocute myself.
Right. We get to have a lot of fun watching him do very dangerous things. Remember, do not try to replicate The Workbench at home. So first, tell us, real quick, 2 minutes, a little bit about yourself.
My name is Tarek. Born and raised in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, actually. Canadian. I've been in this business now for about almost a decade, 10 years.
Okay.
In the LED business. And encompassing all specters, so project, design, product design, lighting design, sales, value engineering, and even just the building of or development of factories in the Middle East.
So how did you get into all that?
It started as a request from Saudi Arabia for a project, and we looked for, they wanted a U.S. company or North American company with UL standards is what they were looking for. So we took a look at the items. I knew nothing of this business whatsoever. And I had help from two friends. One of them you'll know, Austin Parker.
Okay.
We did a few quick things, but and another friend in Canada, Robert Coury, and his brother Jeff actually, and they introduced us to a manufacturer. We started going in with the products, looking at what the requirements was, and at the end of the day, the bid that we gave from a purely American and Canadian product was actually about 45% cheaper.
Oh wow!
Than the prices they were getting in Saudi, and that's where we got started.
Well, that's where we got started here.
That's how I got started, yeah.
Yeah, I'm more so asking, when you first, because you and I have known each other for a long time. Tarek and I have known each other since about 2001.
Yeah.
And we knew each other kind of going through college and that kind of thing, but what brought you into the LED realm? Like back, I guess would have been 2008, 2009?
No, it was back in, like I said, in 2010, it was that project.
Okay.
And when the project happened, it was very interesting seeing all the different designs, developments, components that, really went into these products. And it was definitely far more involved and engrossing than the work I was doing at the time, and it took off from there, and it grew. That passion grew. Learned more about it, and started getting more involved in it. Started attending more fairs and conventions, doing courses at university about it, and it grew from there.
Well, I was actually going to go with where have you been, but first I want to talk. Were they at McGill? The courses?
I was at McGill, yeah.
Okay.
McGill University.
And that's where you went to university?
Yes.
And so in your pursuit of knowledge of this, where has it taken you? Pretty much all over the world.
All over the world. I've been to factories, component factories and assembly factories in Germany, in England, Italy, Poland, Vienna, a lot of stuff in China, Vietnam, and recently, in Saudi Arabia.
So, and you were a part of opening a lot of that in Saudi, were you not?
We were, yes. I was one of the absolute first people in Saudi Arabia in the lighting market in Riyadh, in the capital, to bring in LEDs. Um, we brought in just the regular lamps that you see today, the GU10s. We had them in the market almost a full year and a half before anyone else, before it picked up, and I mean, sales were great.
So let's talk about the benefit of LEDs before we kind of, because we're gonna work into the fact that
Yeah.
LEDs from all over the world are a little different. Everybody
Sure.
kind of has their little touch on it. But what when you're talking about light fixtures, what's some of the top, say, 4 benefits of switching to LED fixtures? And of course, there's a difference between retrofitting a fixture
Sure.
and actually replacing the fixture.
Sure. So, I mean, your main things that you see with LEDs, which separate them from your incandescent, from your halogen, from your fluorescent, is A, they last longer, B, they use less power, and C, the most important factor is they don't emit heat. And when we see people looking at the price of LEDs and retrofitting, and they say, energy savings and cost, and there's a lot of factors that go into that. One of the key things that people don't look at, especially in areas like the Middle East or Europe where heat is a big issue, is air conditioning. Air conditioning is a huge bill. And in industrial, in malls, and houses, when these lights are on for a long time, incandescent, if you've ever sat under one of those small halogen lamps, it gets very hot very quickly, and you're always turning the AC on and off, on and off. LEDs, you don't have that issue because the heat goes into the back, into the heatsink, as opposed to down onto you. So indirectly, you're saving on cooling.
And automatically, most of these fixtures come with a lower wattage intake anyway, correct?
Sure, but you got to be careful because what a lot of people don't see in direct retrofits, and I guess we'll get into this at some point, is power factors. So with higher wattage items, if you have a lower power factor, it is actually less efficient to use it than, let's say, a traditional fluorescent lamp. And that's because, in its simplest form, if you have a 10-watt light or a 20-watt light using 0.5 power factor, you're having to generate and use 20 watts or 40 watts of power to get the 10 or 20 watts that you need. It's a simple division that you do. So with LEDs, a lot of the higher end components, higher end items, higher end fixtures, you have much higher power factors, which is a 1-to-1, and that's where you really start seeing savings. Now, with smaller wattages, doesn't really make a difference.
Okay.
Whether it's 5 watts or 4 watts, and if you have a 0.5 or 0.7 power factor, it's not really an issue there. It's only when you really start scaling up,
right,
and the outputs that really comes into play.
Right. So let's talk about, when you're talking about benefits, you're thinking about an LED fixture as opposed to sort of call it a sodium, halogen or regular incandescent fixture. For those, you're constantly having to replace bulbs.
Yeah.
For LED fixtures, it's a little different. So tell us a little bit about, and again, we talked about the workbench.
Yeah.
Go watch it because we talked about LED drivers.
Sure.
So start with the driver and what's different between, say, an LED chipboard and a driver, and having to constantly replace bulbs with other types of fixtures.
Well, here's your simplest thing. So one of the products and component companies that we use over here at Southern Lighting is from an Italian company called TCI. Now, TCI, their board and drivers are made in Italy. They are top of the line in terms of your component manufacturers. Now, when you use them in tandem with the right heatsink, and let's take the example of a high bay, a 200-watt high bay is equivalent of almost an 800-watt high-pressure sodium, but whereas a sodium lamp is using a lot more power and it's taking a long time to start, it's emitting immense amounts of heat, and their shelf life is 6 months, 8 months, what have you, depending on their operation. The TCI components in a similar high bay are about 70% less power to use, and their lifetime is almost 100,000 hours, non-stop. So yes, it might be a bit more expensive, but in the overall lifetime, it's cheaper. You're losing less power. as managers, or if you have a company that manages these fixtures for you and maintenance, you really don't have to allocate any maintenance. So you just take that entire cost off the table, and you can calculate over 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever the plan is that you're looking for.
Yeah, and I mean that's something that we'll probably get into a little more in detail in a later podcast.
Sure.
But one of the things that we are going to talk about is the fact that, when you do have maintenance on lights, constantly replacing electronics, bulbs, with LEDs, it's a little different.
It is. I mean, even with your regular bulbs, I mean, you have very, very, very cheap bulbs that come from Asia. You also have very cheap bulbs that are, made locally. But you also have very high-end versions of those bulbs as well. And instead of being a plastic base, it'll be a ceramic base.
Okay.
And just simple changes in the heat sinks and the chipboards and the drivers that are being used, isolated versus non-isolated, driver on board, etc. I mean, you'll see that in our workbench. I believe we talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
Those lights will last you far longer. You can get those 3, 4, 5-year warranties out of them. It just, depends what you're willing to pay for it, and if it's something that you're going to use for a long term. Do you really want to invest in it long term or not?
Right. And I mean, that a lot of that is individual choice. And
Yeah.
And of course, when you're talking about, large scale facilities, there's everything from going ahead and building with LED in mind, or if the building's already built, you're having to replace everything.
Sure.
And of course, there's a difference in residential as well.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's best to just stick with bulbs for the time being,
Sure.
unless you're going to do a full house retrofit.
Sure.
So those are some of the benefits and kind of comparisons between the kinds of lights people use right now versus LED. Tell us a little bit about, you listed a several countries you've been to around the world. Tell us a little bit about what each one sort of brings to the table in terms of their own take on LED.
From a chip standpoint, the actual chipsets themselves.
Well, before we go any farther, I do want to say, when you're talking about an LED fixture, you have the driver, you have the fixture, but then there is a chip board in there, which is actually what absorbs the power and emits the light.
Correct.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we covered that.
Sure. So if I go back and I think the Germans and Italians and the Japanese are way ahead when it comes to aesthetics and lifetime and really beautiful fixtures and long-lasting fixtures. Their components are just designed so well, and that's not to say anything bad against, let's say, the Chinese, because the Chinese, they manufacture absolutely fantastic chipsets, fantastic drivers. I mean, 2 of the top 3 driver companies in the world are based out of China, and nobody can, and that's for external fixtures, and nobody can disclaim that. Not in Europe, not in the Americas, not in Asia. These components are used everywhere by every major reputable brand. Germans, Italians, Polish, English, American, doesn't make a difference. They use these components. But when you get into architectural lights, when you get into really color changing, you see the regular color changing strip lights that people love on Amazon and Wish and whatnot. That's basic lighting that anyone can do, but where you see the real beautiful control stuff, where you have digital RGB lighting is what they call it, and just it flows and it turns into an LED screen. Basically, the software there is really European and American software, and for the most part American programming, but the chipsets are all Chinese,
right?
Because they just do them so well. But you have various companies, 4 or 5, around the world, some Chinese, some Japanese, American, and European, that all do fantastic products in terms of chips, drivers, etc.
One of the things that you and I have talked about is, when you're really looking at that high end, and when we get into light design, we'll talk about it. It's always fun to see what the Germans come out with.
Oh yeah, because the Germans come out with stuff which is, as we always like to say, architects and interior designers, they come up with these beautiful things, these renders, these designs, and then they throw it to the light manufacturer and say, okay, make it happen.
Right.
And the Germans, the high-end Chinese companies, high-end component manufacturers when it comes to optics and whatnot, and there's one very good Italian company. They really do make it happen. They find insane ways to manipulate physics, if you will,
Sure.
to get the light to do what, the designer wants it to do. But that can get very expensive very quickly,
Right.
But, and I just want to point it out because it's a question that we always see over here is, well, I don't want to stick with Chinese because they're not good. No. Chinese are very, 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 very good, But as opposed to other markets where the German company, American sub company says this is the product that we're selling, this is how we sell it, we don't touch anything else. The same Chinese company will say, well, if you want to pay $5, $2 for a downlight, we can do it. You want to pay $50, you will not be able to tell the difference between a European, American 100% made product. And being perfectly honest, I would wager 70, 80, 90% of the world's die-cast and fixtures come from China anyways. But they're, as all things, engineered, designed in Europe, in the USA, and made in China.
Right.
And maybe assembled, the final assembly and whatnot, configurations are done in,
the country where they're sold.
Exactly.
Right. So another interesting thing is when you're talking about lights, there are two places in the world, as I understand it from talking to you, that have pretty cool light shows, and that would be, I believe it's Germany and China, correct? Or Hong Kong, rather.
Oh, yeah. And so you have three major light shows. You have one in Las Vegas.
Okay.
You have one in Hong Kong and in Guangzhou. And then you have the Frankfurt Light and Build, which is every 3 years. And the Vegas one and Hong Kong ones are both very good, but the real gem itself is the Frankfurt Light and Build Fair, because that's where, as we say, all the big boys come out.
Yeah.
And they really show off their stuff.
Right.
That's where you see all the new cutting edge technology. And, you have good representation from all countries.
Right. So, and you get to see a lot of different and interesting things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like we see over here. I mean, we were talking about the designer the other day that came and gave us an idea. How do I do this? How do I do it for cheaper? Make it happen. It needs to be in my budget. Well, because we've been to these shows, we automatically knew what the answer was, where to find the solution. And if we didn't, I guarantee you, one of those companies that's in Frankfurt or Vegas or Hong Kong would have an answer for it because they've already thought of it.
Right. Right.
And you're just taking so many different aspects. And a lot of fixtures, they look the same, they look identical, but it's really when you get into the various components that you start seeing differences.
So let's talk about that real quick before we kind of get into light design, which is going to be more specifically episode 2.
Yeah.
When you're talking about specialty fixtures and that kind of thing, one of the things that we offer here at Southern Lighting Solutions, thanks to your expertise, is we offer solutions. Sure. We can find different components, different fixtures. So, one of the things we talk about in the workbench is kind of mixing and matching sort of an American housing with Italian components on the inside. And it's something that we can do and mix and match to offer sort of that hometown feel, but also being able to offer an elevated, operating hours
Sure.
and warranty. So, I may have gone too far and explained most of it.
I mean, no, you do a good point with it. And it really comes down to, what are we doing with the light? Where's it going? In airports, for example, there's no off switch. So the light has to be, the light has to be designed in a way that it's going to operate for 24 hours for whatever lifetime set period of time that you have. And you have to really focus on the light's output remaining as consistent as possible. You don't want to, put in a light and it lasts the entire time, but its output by the end of its lifetime has dropped, 40, 50%. It's not viable.
Right.
You know, you're better off using a cheaper item and then changing the light.
Whenever it
use
comes
it-
up. It's kind of like we talked about earlier. I mean, you've already got that maintenance budget.
Yeah, I mean, it's for something like that, you wouldn't just look at the drivers and boards. You know, in the event something happens, you would use things like fast fix connectors, which are a safety mechanism. So you just unplug, take it out, put it in. Because again, you just can't turn off the electricity.
Right. And
So-
we can talk about some specific, but I mean that's one of the things, and kind of tooting our own horn here.
Well, it's not tuning your own horn. It's more so you can buy a 2x2 panel, which is a very staple product that we have over here at Southern Lighting. You can get it for $40, or you can get it for $150.
It just depends on what's in the inside.
Depends on what's
And-
on the inside.
and which would determine the use.
Exactly.
Excuse me, it's actually the use that determines how you want to design it on the inside.
Exactly. I mean, it's at the end of the day, over here, we love our cars here in the South. So why is one V8 engine going to take you, give you 500,000 miles, and another V8 engine is going to give you 50,000 miles? Just how it's built.
It's the components in the build.
Exactly.
So all of that goes into what we're going to do in episode 2. Want to talk about it briefly. It's light design.
Yes.
And the light design we do is not just, well, that looks good there, that looks good there, that looks good there, and it's all going to be fine. It's a little more detailed than that.
It's a little more detailed. It's something which you don't see prevalent over here right now in the United States.
So give us the 32,000 foot, excuse me, which is, by the way, airplane height. Give us the 32,000 foot version.
Well, okay. Very simply, 32,000 foot version is this. Over here in the United States, a lot of the lighting design, as we call it, is done by electrical engineers who have a base concept of, well, I'm going to put the lights, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's been ingrained into them from university, from experience, what they should do. With lighting design in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, it actually falls to lighting design consultants. So architects and interior designers that have a specialty focus on lighting design. It's an entirely different discipline. So when you build it with lighting designers, with proper lighting software, you can reduce the power, you can reduce the quantity, you can come up with any design that you think of. Electrical engineers are not going to know that. It's not part of their discipline.
Right.
But lighting designer, that's their job. And we work closely with the manufacturers to find out what products they have and incorporate it all together.
And the idea being that you can find some special ways or specific ways to use light to make things look better.
So from a value engineering point, just, throwing it out there quickly, we did this. Just a large warehouse where they were using over 200 high bays, doing 1-for-1 replacements.
Another workbench episode, by the way. We did 3 on high bays.
Yeah. We went in with a complete value engineered retrofit solution with high bays using optics, which was part of that workbench. And we dropped it down from 200 high bays needed to 120 needed to get the same and more output. And that was done with lighting design.
And figured it out for them.
Yep.
And that's our job here at Southern Lighting Solutions. So please, we're actually going to be going through about a 30-minute walkthrough with the software that we use. So we'll have a little intro, but episode 2 is going to be about light design. Please check it out. This, of course, is just our quick intro, getting a chance to kind of meet Tarek, see his background. There will not be an intro on me. Y'all know me. And if y'all are viewers that have never watched any of the stuff that I've produced in the past, my name is McHugh David. I'm the publisher and editor of the Livingston Parish News. There you go. But again, Mr. Tarek Alimedine from Southern Lighting Solutions.
Yes, sir.
Here in Louisiana, we do light design and light fixtures. We're going to be having our first little bit of stock coming in pretty soon, actually.
Yeah. It'll be good to finally have some proper stock in here and not just do it by order like we have been.
Right. So this is the Get Lit podcast. We have what's called the workbench, which is where Tarek gets to slice himself, dice himself, and electrocute himself. Please don't replicate those things at home. We also have this podcast. We're going to be sitting down. I really would appreciate you guys liking this, sharing this, following our social media. I think you're going to learn a lot more about lights than you really knew was kind of out there and what your options are.
Yep.
It's going to change the way you see things, literally. There's a lot of studies that are being done right now that light affects more how you see things, how you interact in your mood,
Oh, yeah.
more than you believe. So again, Tarek, thanks for joining us. Thanks for making the intro.
Absolutely.
Diving in. We have redone the podcast room, so this is going to be a ton of fun. We are going to do the design edition this afternoon. So actually you're going to get 2 this week. Usually we're only going to do 1 podcast a week, followed by about 3 Workbench episodes. So again, my name is McHugh David.
I'm Tarek.
And that is Tarek. And we are here at Southern Lighting Solutions. This is the first episode of the Get Lit podcast. We appreciate you guys joining us. Please, again, follow us on social media. Like our stuff, share our stuff, get the word out. We're just trying to elevate the market. So
Absolutely.
appreciate you participating. We'll see you next time.
Indeed.